Hi everyone, Aaron here with Ghost Raptor Gaming and Guns, and before I get into the video there's a few housekeeping notes that I'd like to make you aware of. I apologize that it's been so long since I've posted a video. My budget lately has been very tight and I haven't been able to do the gun reviews that I've been wanting to do, but there are a few coming up. I will have one of a Glock 27 Gen 5 coming up. I will have one for Ruger P89 coming up, and I will have one for a Mosin Nagant 9130 coming up at some point in the future. I'll get those out as soon as I can. Money's just been very, very tight. I've also been quite sick for the past week, in case you can't tell. So that's kind of slowed me down a little bit, but that's about it. Today, we'll be doing another Q&A session. If you're interested in submitting questions to the Q&A sessions, you need to sign up for Patreon. It's $1 a month. I'll put a link in the description below. You can submit questions there. And then every month, every couple months, I will ask for some questions. I'll field those questions and make a video like this. Now, if you're interested in supporting the channel, obviously like, share, subscribe, comment. All those kinds of things really help me out with the algorithm. Of course, sign up for Patreon. That helps me financially running the channel. Ammunition, targets, gas, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, I still have a GoFundMe going on. The goal is currently $500. I'll put a link in the description to that as well. And without further ado, I'll get right into the questions from my patrons. So the first question I have here is, do you think the cost of 7.62x39 is going to surpass 5.56/223 in the coming year or two? In other words, should I buy in bulk ASAP? Or do you think our supply of 7.62 is going to be stable for another year? That's a fairly difficult question, simply because I don't necessarily think the supply is going to go down. I think the demand is going to go up for certain. And that's simply because the demand for AKs across the board has gone up. Just a couple years ago, you could get a Wasser 10 or Palmetto State Armory GF3 for $400 to $600, depending on where you got it. $400 being more towards the Wasser 10, $600 being more towards the GF3. And now what you're seeing is the GF3 hasn't changed much in its price, but a lot of other guns have. The Wasser 10s are now going for $800, $900, and most AKs across the board are going for $700 plus at this point in time. Which kind of sucks if you don't have an AK in 7.62x39. I have an AK in 5.45, and the ammunition cost hasn't gone up at all. The availability hasn't really come down, so that's been nice for me. But if you own a 7.62x39 AK or don't own one, it's getting a little difficult. So if you don't own one, you're going to spend as much on a good AK like a Zastava as you would a fairly good AR-15. The prices of 7.62x39 are certainly going up, and I think a lot of that just has to do with greed and price gouging. Relatively right now, 1,000 rounds of ammunition of 7.62x39 is still about $100 to $150 than 1,000 rounds of 5.56. Will it go up in price or surpass 5.56? That's a tough one. It could. However, I think even if this import ban goes through from Russia with the 7.62 ammunition, there are companies like Century Arms that import ammunition under the Red Army Standard title. And a lot of that ammunition was made in the Ukraine, so we're probably not going to get that. But they're made in Serbia, they're made in Romania, a lot of the rounds are made in other European countries that produce their own 7.62x39 steel case ammunition. So I think, if anything, they'll just ramp up their output of ammunition, and companies like Century will import from them instead. So what I think will initially happen is the price is going to go up on the Russian stuff, and then as things go on, the price on that caliber round from different countries is eventually going to come back down. So I think you're going to see a spike, and it's going to come back down, but I don't think 7.62x39 will ever get to the point where it stays at the same cost as 5.56 across the board. I just don't see that happening. But before any price gougers can get it to the price of 5.56, I probably would order 500 or 1,000 rounds of it, just to be on the safe side and get it out of the way. And then just keep an eye on domestically produced 7.62 by 39 or imported ammunition from other countries. So just keep an eye on that. And buy here and there. Buy a couple boxes here and there just to keep your stores up. Go to the range, shoot 100 rounds. Wait a couple weeks. Buy 50 rounds, 60 rounds at a time over the course of the next couple weeks. Fire 100 rounds, and you're still plus 20. You see what I'm saying here? So buy a little bit at a time as well to keep your stores up, and I think you'll be happy. Question 2. What types of concealable / compact / subcompact pistols would you first consider buying in 2022 if your life depended on it? There's a lot of really good options on the market right now, and it's kind of hard to go wrong, really. We are seeing things like the Taurus G3 or G3C be very reliable. Of course, Glock has a lot of great options out there. They have the Glock 43, the Glock 42, the 42 or 43X. Forget exactly what model it is. You have the Springfield Hellcat. You have the Kimber Mako, the SIG P365. There are a lot of really good compact and subcompact guns out there. If you're looking compact, I mean, you have M&Ps, you have Glocks, you have Springfields, you have a lot of different guns out there that are quite good. In the subcompact territory, as I just listed off, the Hellcat, the P365, the Kimber Mako, the Taurus G3, G3C, the G3X. There's a lot of different guns out there right now that are in that territory. If I had to go with one right now, it would be the Glock 43X or the Springfield Hellcat. Both are excellent guns and fairly budget friendly. There's the Ruger Max 9 that's out there. There's also the Smith & Wesson M&P Plus. There's a lot of good guns. So basically, if you go into a gun shop now and you say, oh, I'm looking for a micro compact or a subcompact gun that I can trust with my life, you're going to find a lot of good options. But I would say probably right now, I would probably lean towards the Springfield Hellcat. That's just me. I think overall it's a good option for the money. But the Hellcat or the Glock 43X, I think, would be where I go with that. Question number 3. What are your favorite gun cleaning products? I believe I've answered this question in every single Q&A I've done so far. For cleaning and lubrication, just a general purpose, one time, like a one and done kind of product, CLP. Break-free CLP. It cleans quite well, it lubricates quite well, it's fairly thick in its viscosity so it doesn't evaporate too quickly. If you live in a very dry climate where you're worried about your lubrication drying up and your gun safe very quickly, Hops Elite works very well. It is a high viscous lubrication, and I can lubricate all of my guns, leave them in the safe for 4 or 5 months and not have to worry about the lubrication drying up at all, even when it's very dry out. And CLP usually does pretty good. It's usually good for a couple months, so I like CLP. Question number 4. Do you own or have any experience using variable optics? By variable optics, I assume you're meaning LPVOs, which I don't. I have a little bit of experience using some mid-range variable optics. I have a Vortex Crossfire 2 on my Mauser 98, and I like that quite a bit. I believe it's a 2:7 magnification, and I have used that optic on that particular rifle to shoot out and hit torso targets out to 700 yards. So it's quite a good optic. It's quite clear. It doesn't fog up. It has a good eye box, good eye relief. I like it quite a bit. I've also used a Bushnell Pronghorn. I believe that's a 3:9 optic. It's okay for the money, understand it's like a $50 scope, but if I was to go from what I have seen with optics, whether I've used somebody else's or in my own experience, I like Vortex quite a bit, and they have a very good reputation in the firearms community, so I don't think you could go wrong with a Vortex. If you're looking for an LPVO, I would probably go with them. You can get them for, their lower ended models are $200-300 somewhere in there, and I think they make a really good product for the money. So that's about all the experience I have on variable optics, and that's probably what I would go for because I've been very impressed with what I've seen. Question number 5 is, what was the first gun you ever learned to shoot? This is a pretty simple question, and it does come with a recommendation. The first gun I ever learned to shoot on was a bolt-action .22 rifle, and I think really that's a good beginner's gun. You can get a bolt-action .22 from a reputable maker for a couple of $100s, 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and a bunch of targets. All together, probably under $400. I bet you could get the rifle, a couple thousand rounds of ammunition, and the targets. So it's a really good way to get into shooting. It's good for people of all ages and sexes, whether you're male, whether you're female, a child, anything like that. You know, a kid of a reasonable age, and you want to say they're 10 years old and you want to teach them how to shoot. A bolt-action .22 is a really good way to do it. It's very budget-friendly. It's a good tool that you'll be using for literally the rest of your life. I'm 32 years old, and I started shooting a .22 when I was 8. I still shoot a .22 fairly regularly, and I think it's a good tool. It's good for small game, pest control, that kind of thing. Cheap to shoot if you just want to go out and target shoot. It's hard to go wrong with a bolt-action .22 for an introductory firearm. That's what I learned on, and that's what my children will learn on. It's what I think that even if you're an adult and you want to get into the shooting community, it's an excellent way to start getting into it, learning your fundamentals, and then growing from there. So that's what I used, that's what I first shot, and that's what I recommend for first-time shooters. Now, these questions are a little more in-depth, and they do deal with the situation with Russia and the Ukraine. Question number 6 is, how long before Russia invades other countries in the European Union, and what day do you think World War III will start? I actually don't think that anything's going to happen, believe it or not. I think that the media and certain people are trying to make Putin they're trying to make him out to look like an idiot, and I don't think anything could be further from the truth. I think the man is actually quite intelligent and very calculating. And I think that the situation in the Ukraine lends itself very well for a Russian victory because of a few things. The country was already fairly divided before Russia went in to begin with, as to whether to join the Russian Federation or to remain independent. That's something Putin has going for him. The other thing is having independent rebel factions fighting also lends itself quite well to him. Actually, I should start with the independent factions that are not fighting for the Ukraine, because believe it or not, there's independent separatist factions right now that don't want to be part of Russia or the Ukraine, and that lends itself very well to the Russians, because the Ukraine will not back those factions up. Russia will be able to crush those factions and then take big portions of the country from those factions, and guess what? It's just Ukraine's loss, because they're not backing those guys up and Russia's taking them out. The other thing you have is now civilians are fighting, and if you look back at the US and NATO operations in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, when we initially went into those places, we were fighting uniformed factions. Standard affair with most conflicts. But then you started to see civilians fighting NATO forces. And we labeled those civilians fighting NATO forces insurgents and terrorists. By having those civilians and those independent factions fighting against the Russians, they can do the same thing. They can say, well, these aren't Ukrainian regular troops, they're terrorists and they're insurgents. So what you can do as a Russian is you can now engage those threats and eliminate those threats. And if anybody says, well, you're killing civilians, you have that fallback. You can say, no, they're terrorists and they're insurgents. And if you say that they're civilians while we're saying they're terrorists and insurgents, you have to look back on your own history. And so now, because the United States and NATO forces was killing terrorists and insurgents in other countries, they have a free pass to kill any armed civilian in the Ukraine right now. And if we try and call them out on that, we just look like hypocrites and we look like the bad guys. So that's also working very well towards Russia and what Putin wants to accomplish. The other thing is that if Putin wanted to crush Ukraine, he would have done it by now. He would have gone whole hog, send in all of his troops, and steamrolled that country, no problem. They're not as weak as they're being made out to be. They're actually quite strong. And by using conscripts and reservist forces and guys that you don't really care whether necessarily they live or die, and you can still accomplish your goal with very minimal effort, then that's what he's going to do, because it makes the most sense. If the conflict scales up and you see more NATO forces or EU forces going in to support the Ukraine, then he will gear up and send in more regular troops. But I don't think anybody's willing to hit that point yet. I think that Ukraine will fall, sadly, and Putin will get his way. However, do I think he's going to move into other EU countries, like, say, Poland, for instance? I don't think he will. I think the idea is, with the minimal effort and minimal loss of life, expand the territory. Like, unfortunately, I hate to make the comparison, but like Adolf Hitler did in the Second World War. In the 1930s, he was taking territories back that traditionally were German, and people said, don't do that or we'll go to war with you. And he said, I bet you won't. And he took those territories back, and guess what? We didn't go to war with him. We didn't go to war with him until we invaded Poland, right? So I think that Putin is very calculating and very smart in this regard, where that's what he's going to do. He's going to go into other territories that traditionally have belonged to Russia, that other countries aren't willing to support, and he's going to take them back a little at a time. But he won't be stupid enough to take a big risk like invading an EU country or another independent country that will cause Russia to go to war. The other thing you have to think about is their alliance with China and North Korea. Are the Chinese going to do something? Are the North Koreans going to do something? If China does something stupid, like makes their own power play and decides we're going to invade Taiwan, game on. World War III will begin. Because if they do that, we're fighting China, and Russia has to back them up, so Russia's just going to say, screw it, we're invading Poland too, or we're invading these other countries, and World War III will begin. But I don't think it's ever actually going to reach that point. And I sincerely hope that I am right about this. I sincerely hope I am not wrong about this, because the last thing that needs to happen right now is, world war. But I think that's what's going on with that. I think Putin is going to fairly easily and with very minimal effort continue what he's doing, and he's going to take the Ukraine. And I think that's about going to be the end of it. And I believe that might actually sum it up. Yeah, that about sums it up. So that was the last questions. 6 and 7 was, when do you think that Russia will invade other EU nations, and when do you think the Third World War will start? That's how I think it's going to go. So I'd like to thank my patrons for fielding those questions to me. I'm very happy to answer them. I always have a lot of fun kind of answering these questions from you guys, and I'm glad that I can give something back to my supporters. So again, if you're interested in supporting me and the project here and having some of these questions answered, go ahead and follow the link in the description of Patreon. Again, $1 a month goes a long way. This has been Aaron with Ghost Raptor Gaming and Guns. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.